Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Energy Perspectives podcast, brought to you by Energy Dialogues.
Welcome everyone to the next version of Energy Perspectives podcast. We're recording this from Santa Fe, New Mexico. My name is Josh Schmidt. I'm a partner and the Chief Operating Officer at Juniper Capital. Quick on Juniper Capital, we're an upstream-focused private equity fund located in Houston. We've made a number of investments in the Permian Basin, which is a topic that we'll be covering a little bit today. And I also want to thank the Energy Dialogues team for setting this up. The group is doing a fantastic job of getting all the constituents and relevant parties together to foster a lot of these discussions, which are massively beneficial for our industry. We're delighted today we're joined today by two individuals who are very relevant players in the Permian Basin. We have Jeff Hammad, Golden Pass LNG, and also Kris from Kinetik. We're going to be discussing the Permian's role on the global energy stage, and specifically how the Permian natural gas production is becoming globally relevant. So first, I'll just quickly introduce Jeff. So Jeff is the Chief Commercial Officer for Golden Pass LNG. He has broad responsibilities for managing the commercial group at Golden Pass, including the procurement and also the selling of 2.6 BCF a day of gas, which is no small feat in and of itself. He began working at Golden Pass on that project during its early development phases back in 2007, and he's remained a core part of its leadership team since then. Jeff is a longtime Houstonian and received his bachelor's from University of Houston, and following his enlistment in the United States Marine Corps. Jeff, thank you very much for your service. We're also joined by Kris Kindrick. Kris currently serves as a Senior Vice President over Commercial for Kinetik. It's a publicly traded midstream corporation with assets in the Permian Basin. Kris joined Kinetik in 2018 and is responsible for leading the natural gas origination, execution, and optimization in support of Kinetik's underlying commercial growth strategy. So Kris, prior to that, he spent a while at Energy Transfer, which is an interstate gas pipeline and midstream groups. He has a BBA from Texas A&M and an MBA from Rice. So guys, welcome to the podcast. I guess first of all, the topic today is Permian's the growing role on the global energy stage. Golden Pass LNG and Kinetik, clearly two very material players in that topic. So maybe first, Jeff, starting with you, if you wouldn't mind, can you give a quick, kind of a high level, just overview of how Golden Pass LNG is playing a role in this, connecting the Permian Basin or connecting gas to the global markets?
So thank you, Josh. Along the Gulf Coast, there are a number of LNG facilities that are dotted along the coast. We're the latest one that's under construction coming online. And as if you look at any chart, you can see the dramatic growth of natural gas consumption, primarily attributed to LNG. Mm-hmm. So when you think about LNG and you think about where we get our gas from, it's really two basins. It's Haynesville and Permian. Now, because of proximity, Haynesville is very much, in demand, but Permian's right there. So the other major basins, Appalachia, really they're not available for us because of pipeline constraints. Mm-hmm. So clearly, our ability to grow and meet the needs for us to put LNG on the water requires additional infrastructure out of the Permian.
Very good. And then maybe Kris, turning to you, maybe just give a quick overview of Kinetik's business and how they're a player in this game as well.
Sure. No, thank you, Josh. So as Josh mentioned, Kinetik's a publicly traded midstream corporation with assets in the Delaware Basin. We're the fourth largest gas gathering and processor in the Permian, third largest in the Delaware. We have about 2.2 BCF a day of processing. Next year we'll go to 2.4. We also have a crude oil gathering and water gathering and disposal business that complements our G&P business. As we look further downstream, we're also joint venture partners in a number of pipelines, one being Epic Crude, we're a joint venture partner. We're also a joint venture partner with Enterprise and Chinook, we own a third of that. And we're also the majority owner of Permian Highway Pipeline, 55% owner, and also the anchor shipper on that pipeline. So we move a lot of gas from the Permian to the Gulf Coast, and that's part of our strategy to help differentiate ourselves with our customers.
Fantastic. So on the topic of natural gas production and kind of how it's getting connected to the globe here, so to set the stage a little bit, so according to the EIA, Permian gas production has grown in mid-2014. Permian gas production has grown from roughly 2.5 BCF a day to over 17.5 BCF a day this year. So to think that we've essentially had to mirror that production growth with export capacity, because to this point we are using some of that gas in the basin, as you guys know, but not nearly to the extent that we're adding supply, right? So to think that we've had to add the export capacity to more or less handle that gas and get it out of the basin is pretty staggering. To that end, since Q4 of 2019, we've added 10 BCF a day of new natural gas pipeline export capacity out of the basin. So all of that being said, we are still just as constrained today as a basin on the natural gas side as we've ever been, as evidenced by just, I think, last month, the month of August 2024, gas prices at Waha averaged negative $2.20. So people literally paying others to take the gas from them. Kris, for you, maybe starting with you, these constraints and the negative pricing dynamics that we've seen in Waha, it's been a big theme so far in 2024. As a guy on the private equity side and focused on returns, knowing that there's projects I have out there that we're literally paying people to take gas, it's not necessarily what you want to be hearing. So maybe can you talk a little bit about how you guys at Kinetik think about some of these constraints, and then specifically the Matterhorn pipeline, which is imminently coming online. Do you think that solves these problems, or do you think these will, continue, or what other pipelines might need to FID in the future to kind of fix this situation?
Absolutely, no, and Waha has been the topic of discussion for everyone in the Permian Basin. You mentioned negative pricing in August. I think Waha traded negative again tomorrow. 70 straight days of negative pricing at Waha, which is a record.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's something we didn't have on our bingo card this year, but it's here, and it just goes to show what an oil-directed basin will do when you have a lot of associated gas. Yep. And a lot of the producers we're seeing on our system aren't slowing down because the oil economics are so good. So to answer your question on gas takeaway and how does Kinetik view this, I'll take a step back to 2018 when we worked with Kinder Morgan and Exxon and did the PHP pipeline. We knew that gas takeaway was going to be a big item to focus on. It's one thing we wanted to hop on board to differentiate ourselves. So not only are we an equity investor in that pipe, but we're also a big shipper. And we're a shipper for our gas and also our customers' gas. So we've been able to move our customers' gas to the Gulf Coast to give them a Gulf Coast netback, which this year, as you know, has been very profitable for them. So in the Delaware, it's important to differentiate, and that's when we've been able to do it. So as we look forward into the future, we think Matterhorn is going to help relieve this bottleneck that should bring prices back to positive. But a lot of the projections are showing by the end of 26 will be at constraint again. So the market's seen that the Whitewater team has FID'd Blackcomb project, which will be another pipeline that'll come on. Yep. But again, there's going to be more that need to come on. I think Energy Transfer has a Project Warrior, and they've made comments that they would be disappointed if they don't reach FID by next quarter. Kinder Morgan's working on a GCX expansion. So there's a number of projects out there, and that I think some of them will continue to get steam, because I think we've seen over and over this basin continues to outperform on gas growth.
Yep. That's great. Maybe further to the topic of constraints, beyond just the natural gas pipeline and export constraint that we're talking about, what other types of constraints do you see on the horizon over the next year or 2 years? Not just on the pipeline side, but maybe on the treating, processing, water gathering, disposal, anything like that. I know that Kinetik's obviously very much involved in. Any other constraints that are noteworthy to talk about?
Look, anyone that's in the energy business knows it's a complex puzzle to solve, and there's a lot of different bottlenecks and constraints. And when we just look at the midstream side, we've seen in the Permian that water's been a challenge with the seismic activity in New Mexico and Texas. Right now, we're seeing crude takeaway is in good shape, as well as NGL takeaway. Again, we talked on gas, it's going to be constrained. Processing capacity continues to keep up. Lead times there aren't too long to get new plants built. But I think another constraint that's starting to be relieved is sour gas in the basin. A lot of these newer formations that are starting to be explored have higher amounts of CO2 and H2S, and the permitting and the lead time to build those facilities just takes longer. And so eventually midstream will continue to provide those solutions. So I think the industry's done a good job keeping up with a lot of those constraints that the growth has presented.
Got it. So on the crude side, looks pretty good out in the future. Don't really see many constraints on that front. And then NGL's kind of the same way?
I would say so. I think crude right now, next year, they're saying 6.5 million barrels a day of takeaway, where we have 7.4 million barrels of, so we have a lot of room there. And if we grow it 200,000 to 300,000 barrels a day, which is maybe aggressive, we have some room. NGLs were 70 to 80% utilized today. We have Targus, Daytona, Enterprise, Bahia, and ONEOK West Texas projects coming on. So the capacity continues to stay ahead of the constraints. Again, it's going to be the natural gas that I think we're going to see most of the volatility.
Got it.
Energy Dialogues invites you to join key industry leaders, policymakers, regulators, investors, and leading energy companies on September 16th and 17th for the Permian Energy Dialogues. The forum, taking place in Austin, Texas, will provide attendees with the unique opportunity to gain insights into produced water management, industry regulator collaboration, M&A trends, and other important topics that are shaping the future of energy in the Permian Basin. For more information or to register, please visit energy-dialogues.com/PED. Again, that's energy-dialogues.com/PED.
That's awesome. So let's maybe talk about some of these pipelines and the projects themselves. When you think about, having gas prices in a certain basin being negative, pipelines are obviously connecting these basins to the Gulf Coast, or connecting the Permian to the Gulf Coast. Obviously, it has a positive price that's more tied to the Henry Hub. So thinking about the economics involved in connecting that kind of a spread. So right now they're massive spreads, seemingly presenting a very economic venture to go out and build a pipeline. Maybe Jeff, we talked about Matterhorn coming on and being imminently, in service, as well as the Blackcomb JV that's coming in 2026. Given the size of some of these constraints that we're seeing in the market, one could ask, hey, why aren't more of these coming on? And a lot of times I think our minds immediately run to, well, what's the regulatory situation surrounding a lot of these pipelines? Would you mind just talking about a little bit about, maybe the regulatory environment and how it's impacting some of these pipelines getting built or getting FID'd?
Yeah, so I think the impact of the regulatory environment is pretty clear in one way. All the solutions out of the Permian are trying to avoid crossing state lines. They want to avoid being an interstate pipeline. They want to stick with the Texas regulatory regime. So that's why they're looking for three paths out. You can either go south down into South Texas. You can come north like the Warrior Pipeline, try to get into the Carthage area, or you can come straight into the Katy area and connect with some new pipelines that are being contemplated in that area. So, but all of those solutions involve Texas-based solutions, because the challenge of going through a FERC process to cross that border and go into Louisiana is just not something that either off-takers or developers have the appetite for. Nobody wants to be the next Keystone. They want to stay out of the headlines. They just want to get their product to market. It's environmentally friendly to do that, avoid the flaring, get that Permian gas to market. But really it's come down to a very simple calculation of, if you're on the Texas side of the border, we will look at solutions in that route.
Got it. So maybe you hit on some of this already, but aside from Mexico, from your perspective, what are the best routes, for the next natural gas pipeline, whether it's building a connection to the LNG or getting out of the Permian? What is do you have a view on that?
I do, and I think the view is backed by just straight fundamentals. I think you want to get your product on the water, so it needs to turn into LNG. Right now, the south route is pretty saturated. You got to wonder, with following the Blackcomb announcement, whether the supply demand is balanced over there. My suggestion would be straight into the Katy hub, provided that the LNG community meets you halfway. So it's going to take a producer push matched by a demand based pipeline coming somewhere into the Katy area.
Got it.
And Josh, part of your original question was, well, why aren't these pipes getting FID'd sooner and faster? And it's a great question, which the volatility we've seen and more pipes keep getting built. Right. I think a lot of these shippers have been around for a long time. Some of them lived through a project like Rex, which is a pipeline that was built right into the Marcellus Shale. And they're sitting here paying long-term taker pays when the basis has collapsed. Right. And so they're very patient, and they want to be very smart about taking these long-term, usually 10 or 15-year taker pay agreements. But the Permian's been different because it's all associated gas growth.
Right.
So you're saying 70 days of negative pricing is not enough? You know?
Hey, we put our money where our mouth is. We're the largest shipper on PHP. Yep. We have a big position there, and again, a lot of it's on behalf of our customers. And they've appreciated the price diversification, and they're not sitting here worrying about, when Waha traded negative $6 over, a few weekends ago. They know they're getting a Henry Hub ship channel type price.
Yep. Yeah, no, it is interesting when you think about the economics of the basin being driven by the liquids. It's the oil and the NGL content that's really driving the economic decisions and the production that's driving the decision to drill these new wells. When the byproduct, when natural gas is more or less an afterthought from an economic perspective, it definitely seems like it would be the environment, a rich environment for pipeline type investments where you're there to capture some of that negative pricing should it arise.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about a lot about the physical pipeline constraints playing a role in the production and the transportation of natural gas. There's also some other dynamics that we've been taught that we've heard about at play with respect to the quality of the natural gas that's being produced. I think most people assume, when natural gas comes out of the ground, it's of the same quality that it is when you turn your stove on at home. It's not the case. Maybe Kris, starting with you. Would you mind talking a little bit about some of these quality dynamics that are at play in the Permian today with the natural gas production growth and how it's impacting the transportation, the processing, the treating, things like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of the Delaware and Permian Basin, we've seen a lot of sweet gas growth, which, as you mentioned, it goes through a processing plant, the residue leaves, and it's clean. You burn it at your burner tip. What we're starting to see more of in the Midland, and especially the New Mexico portion of the Delaware Basin, are higher amounts of CO2, H2S. Those can be stripped out with amine treating, and sometimes when they're very high amounts, they have to be injected downhole through AGIs. So those can be handled by midstream. One of the other components we're starting to see that's a lot more challenging to take out is nitrogen. Nitrogens, we're starting to see that in the Midland Basin, and some NRUs or nitrogen rejection units have been installed there. And then in the northern part of New Mexico, we're starting to see more nitrogen. It's an interesting dilemma because pipeline quality spec is 3%. So usually the midstreamer isn't going to put it in an NRU unless they can blend their gas and get it to 3. And the pipeline's going to take it if it's at 3. So that's what we're seeing the industry do. But then what we're hearing, and Jeff may talk about this a little bit, is LNG likes to see a quality spec lower than 3%. So how do you balance those two mismatches when a lot of the pipeline grid have legacy tariffs at 3%? So it's a very interesting problem, and it's starting to develop more along the Gulf Coast as you move more Permian gas to the Gulf Coast.
So we're hearing about it more now, it sounds like, because of where the marginal demand is coming from in a lot of ways. The LNG demand that's coming is kind of speaking up here and saying this doesn't work for us. But real quick, before we go to the LNG side, has there been a change that or at least do you know of? Has there been a recent is the gas we're producing in the Permian today just have more nitrogen because of some of the formations that we're producing, or has it kind of always been this way? It hasn't really changed a whole lot. It's just the incremental demand that's coming on to the pipe, or that's coming onto the system, being the LNG, is really the impetus around this nitrogen issue that we really, as just being candid, hadn't really heard about that much before, this last couple of years.
I'll speak for Kinetik ourselves. We acquired an asset a few months ago, and on that system, a lot of those formations we're seeing higher amounts of nitrogen. And so as these tier 1 and tier 2 areas are being developed, nitrogen is growing, and it's becoming a bigger part of the mix. And we're starting to ask ourselves, how do we handle it? So I think it's actually growing based on the formations that are being drilled.
Got it. Makes sense.
We've seen the same thing. We've been watching the blended nitrogen content coming out of the area, and it's been growing since the time that Golden Pass has been under construction. We've seen it more than double.
Wow. Okay.
So it's definitely peaking.
And to Jeff's earlier point, for Golden Pass, to have Haynesville as almost a blending tool right next to is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
I do wonder, with LNG facilities that are sole sourcing Permian gas, how are they going to manage the nitrogen?
Sure.
And so that's a question they're just going to have to ask and deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe jump to the LNG side of the equation. Maybe Jeff, talk a little bit about what is it about the nitrogen that causes an issue for you guys, and how are you handling it?
Sure. Let me set the stage a little bit to remind folks about the different qualities from the Haynesville and the Permian. So 3% pipeline, 3% inerts is pipeline spec. Inerts can be CO2 or nitrogen and a handful of other things. Haynesville is basically all their inerts are coming from CO2, and they got a de minimis, like 0.2% nitrogen. Permian is the exact opposite. Permian is it's high nitrogen, sometimes 2-3%, and then minimal CO2. So an LNG guy we're looking at these, and we don't like nitrogen, and here's why. When you have to liquefy nitrogen, you have to spend energy to liquefy that nitrogen and pull it out of your system. So even if your facility can take it, you're wasting energy trying to remove all that nitrogen inside your facility. CO2, the way when it comes to an LNG facility, comes out first. So you're not spending an enormous amount of energy bringing that CO2 down to 260 degrees below zero. So just from an energy perspective, low nitrogen gas has an advantage. Now, once nitrogen gets inside an LNG facility, depending on how that unit is constructed, you could choke out the facility and essentially limit the capacity of the overall facility based on a design spec of some piece of the equation that wasn't built to accommodate that amount of nitrogen. And if you want to fix it, and you're going to have to spend a bunch of money, but you also have to get a permit. And that's a FERC permit, and if you got any other FERC permits,
That sounds like it wouldn't take that long, though, right?
I look at it as
FERC permits generally terrifying.
right.
But
yeah, you don't want a 7-year, 10-year disaster on your hands. So your first thing you're going to do is say, what can I do to limit the amount of nitrogen I bring into my facility, keep it to where I can maximize my production, not choke it out or cause trips within the facility. So it's the first thing you do. And when we go source gas, that's one of our questions is, what's your nitrogen content? And one of the things that we see developing is that if you've got a lower nitrogen quality stream than the other guy, then I might preferentially buy from you. So it's something to keep an eye on for sure. And it's something that I don't think should be ignored when you look at how much of your demand is going to the LNG market.
Right.
It's going to become significant, and it has the opportunity to begin distorting markets for Permian gas.
maybe on that, Kris, do you see, given these tariffs are, very important documents, they've been around a long time, do you foresee a future where pipeline spec changes? Or do you see guys like yourself just starting to make more commercial decisions around what you want the pipeline spec to be in order to maybe satisfy some of the bigger customers on the other side of the equation from the producer?
Look, it's a great question, and it's a complicated problem because the pipeline grid's so interconnected. You don't want to be the only pipeline that's, say, at 1%. Mm-hmm. You lose all ability to offload and take in new supply. And then going a step further, there's been companies that have tried to look at, hey, let's build a bullet pipe from the Permian to the Gulf Coast at a 1% nitrogen level. Well, that means the processors delivering that gas has got to do something with the nitrogen. And they're going to say, well, I may deliver that to a 3% pipeline because they're going to have to spend the money now. So it's a very complex challenge. So if I have a crystal ball, I don't think the pipeline grid's going to change from 3%. I think they're going to continue to optimize and stay at that 3% level. And to a comment that Jeff made earlier, higher nitrogen, lower CO2 coming out of the Permian, some of these formations have significant amounts of CO2 and nitrogen, but CO2 comes out easier with amine. So you get that out first, and the nitrogen comes out next if you have an NRU. If not, you blend it, right? So you're constantly looking at these blending tools, and a lot of pipelines have in their tariff that you can actually give them higher than 3% as long as they can blend and not deliver more than 3% downstream. So that means you're going to have even maybe more nitrogen at some of these receipt points if they can stay below 3% inerts downstream. So, and you have multiple players owning and operating this pipeline. It's not just one party. So it's a very complex situation.
Got it. Maybe Jeff, from your perspective, what else can the midstream market do? What else can you guys do to help handle that problem so that you're not sitting there with a nitrogen issue on your hands when you're taking gas at the plant?
I think economics are going to end up driving the solution here because nobody's going to do us favors just for the sake of it. I think once you start seeing LNG buyers preferentially enter into agreements with lower night with folks, either pipelines or producers that are actively trying to manage it, you will begin to see a bifurcation in price that will incentivize that. It's something we have not seen in the U.S. before, but you're beginning to see it in the behaviors of how LNG buyers actually procure long-term supply.
Got it. And what is that? So if pipeline spec is 3%, if just envision one day there being kind of a cutoff, what is that? Is there a certain percentage where you would say, hey, a new kind of, let's call it an LNG grade molecule that you guys would be preferentially
what is the sweet spot?
Yeah, but is there a sweet spot?
Yeah, it's about 1.5% nitrogen. Okay. 1.5% nitrogen, very easy to accommodate. 2% with blending. Beyond that, you begin to have to start curtailing the amount that you're buying based on where the rest of your supply is coming from. A company like Golden Pass, we're very fortunate that we have a 42-inch pipe that's going straight to Haynesville. So we've ran 2.6 BCF a day pipeline. We're very well situated to blend, but you're going to begin seeing it with people who don't have those options first.
Got it. Well, I think that's about all the topics we had to cover today. I want to thank everyone again for joining us on this podcast of Energy Perspectives. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Energy Perspectives podcast. We hope you enjoyed this engaging conversation. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss out on an episode of the Energy Perspectives. For more information on Energy Dialogues, please visit energy-dialogues.com. Until next time.